Thank you, Alicia, and welcome everyone. Thank you for all coming out this evening. I know we're all trying to go out and be distracted and avoid the internet so we avoid spoilers for Endgame. So it's a privilege for me to be here tonight to just be the moderator for this discussion between two gentlemen that I've known for actually many years now. First off, Lonnie Vigil, he was the first Dubin Fellow here at SAR in '94, I believe, and I was the first Harvey W. Braniger Jr. intern here in '95, '96, and Lonnie was still here, and because they were installing the pot, as when you go to the slideshow, you know which one the pot is. And they were installing, and Lonnie was around, off and on during that time. And that's when I first really got to meet him and to know him a little bit. And it was always really nice because he was always very, very encouraging. And that he said that what a nice opportunity to have, and that that maybe that this is the beginning of something, and one day he'll be the person in charge here, or whatever too. So, and it was just, and for me, my entire goal was just to make it through that year or so. To have something, for someone to suggest that there was something beyond that was really nice and inspiring. So that's something that I always remembered. And he's brought it up different times since in different places, so I've always appreciated that. And but Lonnie, so he's from the Pueblo of where my grandmother was born, from Navajo, Pueblo. And he originally was, I guess, is it fair to say, a bureaucrat? Yeah. A bureaucrat for in the finance for the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C. And like what I kind of hoped to do as well is after that, then he went and started his real career, in the sense, after that, and then came back and started doing pottery. And so he returned home and he started to work, in a sense, traditionally, and especially the clay that is a traditional source clay there at Navajo, which is the micaceous clay. And micaceous clay, had been seen as for utilitarian pots, bean pots and such. And it was Lonnie's works and others who helped really to make micaceous pottery be appreciated at the same level as both the black on black and other polychromes, and that it all became types of art pottery. And so creating these magnificent vessels, which still could cook up a nice pot of beans as well too. So if you really wanted to, but so yeah, so it's he's also been a best of show winner at Santa Fe Indian Market, and his collections are everywhere. I just got back, I told him now I just got back from a private collection in San Diego last night, where I saw 3 of his vessels, sitting in the places out there. And we also have several here up at the IARC, and there are those magnificent pieces here. And then Jason Garcia, he's from the Pueblo of Santa Clara, and he's someone that I've known for a very long time. My brother and I was hang out with his brother, and we also as de facto then we'd also Jason would be there as well, and we got to know him, and as he grew up and he became his own person, it's always been just basically it's a treat to see him grow and live his life and experience things and be his own iconoclastic individual in a sense too. He, I just remember, when he was very young, and he and my younger brother playing Sonic the Hedgehog, the old Sega video game console. And you collect all these rings, and if you get bumped, you lose all the rings. And then they kept doing that, and then losing all the rings, and they kept saying to each other, all for naught, over and over again until they lost their rings. So that's the one thing to remember that I have of them both when they were very young. But so then Jason, he started getting really known when he was doing these little figurines that were also commentaries. as well on outside life, and remember that well-known one that has the little kid, the Anglo kid, dresses in Indian and such as well. And then he started doing some of the works in tiles. And as both these artists can tell you, that making a nice flat tile is a lot harder than you think it would be. It's not easy. And then after that, and he branched out into printmaking, and Jason gives a great explanation on real printmaking as opposed to a photographic reproduction, a digital reproduction, but actual pulling prints as well. And so he's done very well at that as well. And so he's well known for his Tewa Tales of Suspense series, and he's received numerous awards and honors as well. And he's also another Ronald and Susan Dubin Fellow here at SAR as well. So I think it's nice, kind of neat tonight. I think we have at least 3 Dubin Fellows here in attendance this evening. So that's really nice. And again, Jason's works are also everywhere, in both of institutions, private collections, and if you're lucky, you could also have it in your house tonight too, if you want to purchase a work. Except here. Except okay, so that's something for SCR to think about. So, yeah, exactly. So, there was a boss. That's right. We tell the acting boss. But so I just really want to turn this into a discussion between these 2 gentlemen, and just starting it off. Basically, we'll just start kind of in the beginning. Just if you could both just talk about your early experiences in either art or just making.
Tony I'm very happy to be here with these 2 gentlemen here tonight to talk a little bit about our lives and our work that'll help enlighten and maybe help understand our work and how we do it, why we do it, and those kinds of things. And then also appreciate the staff here at SAR for inviting us. I feel like a long-term person here since I was a Dubin Fellow, and so I always have a place here, and I'm happy to be here. And go ahead. I just a little bit of background. I grew up in Navajo, which is my village, and I was raised in my grandfather's home. And by the time I was a small child, there was just one person making pottery in our village, and that was our Ko'oko'apovi, and she passed away like maybe 55 or 57. And thereafter, there wasn't anyone making any pottery in the village anymore. But I do come from a pottery family because Ko'apovi's mother, who was my great-grandmother, was probably one of the most prolific potters between, say, probably 1870 to about 1940. And so, then my mom...
Could you just say her name again?
My aunt is named Ko'apovi, and that means flower beads. And I don't even know her Christian name. We just always call her by Pueblo. And so that was my exposure to the pottery making. I never saw her making any, but I knew that she made it. And then as I went on through my family life, then I found that going through the day school at the village, and then we transferred to a public school in Milwaukee after that, are we going to interact with this, or should I just continue telling one story, or how do we want to do this? You won't? Okay. And so at that point, almost everything I did was just, it was just pushed towards scholastics, because at the time, this was like by the 1950s and 60s, and so there was a lot of push for acculturation. So that's where everything felt like it was being pushed, to educate yourself. And so, and my mother was very aggressive about that. She really pushed me for it. And I think all of that, many of those things I did was to satisfy her, but I'm glad I did it, because in her effort to push me, it brought me to places that I might not have experienced in my life. So as it turned out, I graduated from the Milwaukee High School in 1968. And I didn't know anything about college or how to apply or none of that, because really only 1 or 2 people in our family had gone to college, and they really hadn't moved back to the Pueblo, so there was really no role model that I could talk to or anything like that. And but in high school, I think the first or second year, there was a counselor that came to the school, and they happened to be from a business school in Denver, and I had kept the brochure for some reason. And so I graduated in May, and then around September, my mom says, well, you know, what are you going to do? And she told me, what am I going to do? And so she kind of said to me, you know, it's time for you to get on your own. You need to figure out what you're going to do. And so I found the brochure, and I went across to the neighbor's house to my aunt to make a phone call to the school, because at that time, I think they were the only ones across who had the phone, and then somebody else in the plaza, and then 1 or 2 people had a car. So I went there, I called the school, and I said, I'd like to come to school there, but I said, I don't have any money. And they said, well, don't worry about it. You come, we have student loans, and you can sign up for them, and that can pay your tuition and books. So somehow my mother scraped up the money together for a bus fare and a little bit of money for me to go on. So I arrived in Denver around, I guess, I took a late bus at night from Espanola. So I got there around 2 or 2:30 in the morning, and petrified to death, because I had never been, you know, to a city and didn't even know how to read a map or ride a bus, any of that. So it was really kind of frightening, and I sat there. I had my little bag, my pillow, and a jacket, and I saw people coming and going, and then I started to cry because I was so sad. And I said, well, I still have this money left over. I could buy a ticket and go back home. I said, well, then I would just be back at square one. And I said I would disappoint my mom and myself as well. So then I saw people taking cabs, and then so I asked someone, where are those people going? Well, the driver takes them to wherever they want to go. Oh, I said, well, good. And then finally I said to myself, okay, by sunrise you can sit here and cry all day if you want to, or you can get a cab and tell them to take you to a rooming house. And so I went to, I got in the cab, and they took me to a rooming house, and by just luck, one of my cousins was staying there because he was in school at the same school that I had planned to apply. So when I got there, they happened to be having breakfast, because by this time it was 7:30 in the morning. And I went in, and we greeted each other. And then the person who was in charge said, well, you can take your bags to the room. So I took them up there, and then I started to cry again because I missed my family so much. And I washed my face, and I went back downstairs, and I sat down to eat. And then I missed them, you know, because they weren't there. And then again, I felt like crying, and the woman said, everything is fresh. I don't know why you don't want to eat. And that was enough. So I just stood up from the table, and I went back up to my room. And then I just waited for my cousin, and we walked to the school. And then from there, it just started this whole process. I was able to find a job at McDonald's. It was the first paying job I had ever really had. So, and then for that 1 year, I worked there and went to school during the day and then worked at night. But in the process of doing all of that, I said, this isn't going to be enough education, so I need to apply for a couple of state universities. So I applied for, I think, UNM Eastern and maybe Las Cruces. And then I said, and I also need money to do all of this, so I applied through the All Indian Pueblo Council for a scholarship. So I didn't hear anything, and I completed my studies there and got an Associate of Arts degree in accounting. And I came home. I said, I'll be home for 2 weeks, and then I'll go back and I'll look for a job. But can everyone hear? When I got home, the day before I was going to leave, in the mail came this notice from the All Indian Pueblo Council. You have been granted a scholarship for this year, and if you get a certain grade point average, you can continue it every year. So I said, well, thank God. So I told my mom, I said, there's a change in plans. I now have the money to go to Eastern, so I'm going to go there. So I went to one of my friends who had a car, And she said, well, Lon, I'd like to take you, but I can't see at night, and that's going to be over a 6 to 8 hour round trip for me. So my mom came to the rescue again, and she got a bus ticket for me, and I got on the bus and went to Clovis. And then from Clovis, they sent someone from Portales, which was like half an hour away. And I hopped on the bus, got to the school, put my bags down, and then I said, if I don't like it here, I'm not going to stay. So I'm not going to pack my bags. So for 2 days, I did not pack my bags. So a week later, it was just like I studied and I didn't know anybody, so it was easy just to study all the time. So I had a very good grade point average the first year, and then the experience I had from the business school helped me out as well. And then they came to me, the scholarship agency, and they said, well, you've done so well, and Native students are now being welcomed to various Ivy League colleges throughout the US, and we'd like for you to apply. So I said, well, what's available? And they said Dartmouth and Princeton, all these different Ivy League schools, and so I decided to apply to Dartmouth. And then after looking at the map, I said, what if something happens in my family? How am I going to get home? And so I just decided that that probably was not the best choice. So I refused that. And sometimes I have regrets about it, and I say, no, everything is intended to be the way it is. So I'll just follow what's going on. So eventually I did get a degree and graduated from there. And I was an intern every summer at the Northern Pueblos Agency, which is part of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I guess the whole intention was they interned college students to eventually become employees at the BIA. So that happened eventually. I graduated, and in '75, I think I went there to work temporarily, and then a year later I was hired permanently as a loan assistant. And then a year or 2 years later, the person in charge, the credit officer, left the organization, and so the big boss called me and he said, Lonnie, I'd like for you to take over the whole department. Are you willing to do it? I said, well, Mr. Friedman, I'm not sure. I said, I've just been here a year and a half. And he says, well, the area director's office will help you with this. And I said, well, sure, I'll do it then. So I went ahead and took charge of that whole department. And by the late 70s, I just said, God, this isn't really what I want to be doing. By this time, the clay mother was already, poking me and telling me, come to me. And so I resigned a couple of times, and then asked me to come back. And then in 1980, I moved to Washington, D.C., thinking, well, maybe I need a different change of pace. Maybe if I'm in a different physical location, I'll feel better about the job. Well, I got there, and 2 years later, it was still the same feeling. I really knew that I was not doing what I came here to do. And so about this time of the year, I went to a performance at the Kennedy Center, and it was called the Night of the First Americans, and there were Native people from all over the US there, and drumming and singing and food, and in the end, this Lakota man stood up and he blessed everybody and thanked everybody for being there, and he said it in his language and gave a blessing to everybody, and I said to myself, what am I doing here? So the next day I went into my office and I wrote my resignation, and I moved back. And 2 weeks later I was here, and I didn't tell my family anything because we hadn't talked about this, and since I was supporting them and still do, that decision also affected them as well, And so I was home for 2 weeks, and then they said, well, is your vacation not over yet? So then it turned out that I finally had to explain that I had decided that I wasn't happy with what I was doing, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but my mission now was to figure out what it was that I'm supposed to be doing with my life. And I had no idea that it was pottery making. And of course, my mother was disappointed because she thought that she had invested a lot of time, energy, and her love and support to do what I was doing. Plus, she thought it was of value to be an executive and sit behind a desk and, direct people. And she, in her perception, that was valuable, and not that it isn't But for me, that wasn't really what was important for me. And my brother, of course, also was disappointed. So I just kind of said, I'm not going to allow them to dissuade me. And maybe 6 months later, I said, oh God, maybe I should go back to DC. I'm sure the position hasn't been filled yet, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, you already made the decision, you can't do that. So I just, like a year later, maybe I just began to do this experimenting with the clay. And that's where it all sort of slowly just began. And over a course of maybe, I would say an 8-year period, just learning how to find the materials, how to put them together, without going to anybody to learn, because I felt like it was in me and it was up to me to bring it out. And I just prayed, and by meditation and prayer and asking guidance from my great-grandmother's spirit and the clay mother herself, to show me if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, bring the materials and the knowledge to me. And so slowly but surely, my maybe a second or third year when I was making the pottery, because I was doing this sort of in hiding. I was working at my brother's house because there was nobody living there at the time. But my great uncle and my great aunt found out about it. So they both individually called me over and said, oh dear, what are they going to tell me? You're a man and you're not supposed to be making pottery. Well, no, it didn't turn out that way. My mom's godmother, my great aunt, she said, we're happy that you're doing this. And she said, my mother, meaning my great grandmother, was a big maker of pottery, and this is how she supported her family. And we're happy you decided to do this. And so she said, I've been holding on to these stones, and she said, they belong to your great grandmother, and so I would like for you to have them. And wow, I just said, oh my God, this is just showing me clearly that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then maybe a week and a half later, then her older brother called me over, my uncle, who was also my mom's godfather. And he called me Güero because I have light hair. And he said, Güero, he says, I hear that you're making pottery. And then he gave me advice, on how I should take care of it and my responsibility now that I took it on. It's not to play with, this is real, and you have to honor and respect and take care of it. And so after all of the advice and telling me that he was glad I was doing it, he handed me a coffee can. And so I opened it, and it was a coffee can of my Keisha slip. And I said, oh, this belonged to my Bovi, because part of it had gotten charred, it was kind of black. And her firing shed, and her things where she kept her pottery stuff was, I remember as maybe when I was 10 or 11 years old, I remember it burning down. So I said she probably saved some of this from that fire. And so then I began using those materials together with it. And then experimenting also with the burnished black and red, because that's a Tewa tradition, not just the San Alfonso or Santa Clara or San Juan, but all Tewa villages do the burnished black and red ware. So I was doing that as well in combination, doing both of them together. But the interesting thing about it is when I worked on them together, the mica clay would kind of like push the other one away. And so I said, okay, then you don't have to be jealous. I'm going to give you as much time as well. And so finally I was back and forth with both of them in the late 80s. I decided, well, I think I'll just focus on my acacia square, because one of my good friends whom I met, even before I was making pottery, Estela Loreto from Jemez, Pueblo, she's a sculptor, and she said to me, Mom, why don't you just try making the micacia square, just focus on that, because your designing isn't quite fine enough. And it was true, because my lines weren't that fine, and it was just, it was interesting. It was just something that I couldn't do. I wasn't not into that kind of detail. So then the late 80s, by then I had met various other potters throughout the Pueblos, and I knew many of them already growing up. And one of my special aunts at Santa Clara, Teresita Naranjo, I knew her since I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and she was just a favorite. She was like my second mother. We weren't blood related, but we were just that close. And I thought, even before I started making pottery, I thought, well, if she needs my help, I can help her represent her work. That way get involved in it. But I'm off on a little bit of a tangent there. And so in the late 80s, I think some friends said, well, why don't you apply for Indian market? And I just made this assumption like there's this big list of people waiting to get in, and how is it that my work is going to get approved to get in? So finally in 1990 we applied and we were selected, and of course you can get a booth for this year, but there's no guarantee next year. So I told my family, and we just, my brother and I got busy and started working, because by this time my brother came around and he saw how much I was enjoying it, and he was beginning to help me. So he has been my right hand for all the years that we lived, and he recently passed away, so now I have lost my right hand for my work. But we entered Indian market that year, and we came and set up the booth, and I said, I'll be back. If anybody comes, just tell them I went to go pick up the pottery at the judging. So I went to the Sweeney Center, and I was rushing to get there, and then I went to the, they took me to the table where my pots were, and there were all these ribbons around me. And I said, I wonder where those. I thought maybe they were just misplaced or something. And here it was a division award, the first, second. There were like 4 or 5 ribbons. And then I was so happy. I put them inside the jar and walked to the booth to tell my family that what had happened. And then in like, I guess 2 hours, everything was gone. And so then I think my family really understood the appreciation that was there for the work, and how much I was enjoying what I was doing, and then the gratitude that was being shown for our efforts. And so the next year we were accepted again, and I think the 3rd year we must have missed the deadline. We had some ceremonies going on in the family, and so we were busy with that, and we forgot everything about the Indian market deadline. And so I said to my family, I forgot about the market deadline because we were busy with something else. And I said, and this is my plan. If you can help me, I want to do my own Indian market opening at the house. And what we'll do is we'll make a feast, like a regular Pueblo feast day, and we'll just open on Wednesday, have a show, and have everyone come in. We'll empty out the house, put all the pottery up for display, and my mom and the sister and my aunts, they all made chili, pozole, all of the feast day foods. And I rented a big tent and table and chairs, and then I finally went to, I had some list of people that I knew, so I just filled out all the names, and I had made a card, sent them out in the mail, and then I left some at La Fonda Hotel and maybe another hotel. And so we had a really nice turnout, and it turned out to be really nice. And then from there we did it for maybe about 7 or 8 years. But after a while it just got to be a lot to do 2 days before a new market, to create all the work, to have to set up my house, clean yards, do a big feast, pay for it all. And so we just decided that, and then my mom was getting older, it was just beyond her ability to do all of that. So maybe about after 10 years then we discontinued doing that. Because after a while people said, well, are you having your dinner this year? It wasn't anything about the pottery. And I think the following year, one of the pieces of our work, it's a water jar. And it's not a normal size. I just decided to make it on a larger scale. And it has a rainbow shoulder, and it's maybe this big. And strangely enough, there's a water serpent design that was created by the fire clouding, and I don't have any way to control it, but it was a stylized serpent that came onto that pot. And then underneath it, there's a spirit line, which the fire clouding did as well. And so I thought, well, let's go ahead and we'll apply this one for the judging. So we took it in a couple of other pieces, I think. And so I went to the preview that evening, and people were saying, you won. And I said, well, what do they mean? And so it was it was the best of pottery, the best of class in pottery. And so, I was so thankful, and right away appreciated my mother for giving us this gift. And then I took it back to the booth, and then people came to, some of the people that I knew came, and they said, you should have won. And I said, well, we did. We got this Best of Class award. They said, no, you should have won the Best of Show, because this piece was competing for the Best of Show. I said, wow. And at that time, of course, I didn't really understand what they meant Best of Show. we applied because it almost was part of the whole process. You create the work, fill out the application, and if you want to, you submit pieces for judging. And it was, I never take them and say, oh, you're gonna win. I just take them and I say, I brought you here, you're gonna be fine and safe. And I'm not expecting anything of you. Whatever happens here, we accept it and we're happy. But, you know, don't feel any obligation. You know, they have to be something more than what they are. So that was my impression, and for some reason everyone came to see that piece, but at that time the transition still had not been made where people were comfortable enough to look at a micaceous piece of pottery and say it's not a cooking pot. And that was never my intention. I didn't make them so they weren't cooking pots. I just made them like whatever I was guided to make. And then in 2001 is when we won the Best of Show award. And I said, oh, thank you, my mother. I wasn't ready yet. We had only been there for 3 years. And it could have hurt other people's feelings that after 3 years that I would get that kind of recognition for my work. And our work really is what it is. And when we talk about our or ours, me or mine, sure we make them, but it's ours, you know, because it belongs collectively to the community. It's a collective cultural property that belongs to all of us. I happen to be just the one making it. You know, I'm the one that's keeping it alive. But it doesn't belong to me. I didn't create it. We were fortunate that our ancestors left it to us. They loved us. They cared for us enough that they left it for us. And it's up to us to take care of it. And so when we won the Best of Show, I was very, very thankful, but also humbled in that the time that it took, and you just, it's a wonderful feeling. But till this day, I mean, I don't do my work for that kind of recognition. I mean, I enjoy it when people like it and they respond to it. But if I was doing it for only that reason, I would have probably stopped doing that a long time ago.
It has to have a meaning to yourself as well.
Yes, and then of course, you know, it's important, and then we're also cultural representatives to keep it alive.
So Jason, so tell us your origin story as well.
I'm like kind of like, wow, how do I follow that one? But thank you, Kunawaha. So beautiful and so eloquent, you know, said, and just thinking like, how do I follow this up? So in terms of like, I guess you would say artist trajectory or my origin story in that sense of being a big superhero fan and pop culture fan, you know, I didn't get bit by a spider or anything like that, but I guess in the sense of it's kind of like the Hulk. You know, you're infused with all these gamma rays, but there's like this creative ray, this creative force that's there, just growing up in Santa Clara, Pueblo, and also my family is also has Pewaukee Pueblo and San Juan Pueblo as well too, in addition to being solely Santa Clara Pueblo. And both paternal sides and maternal sides are potters since, you know, time immemorial. So, you know, and I mentioned in the Pasatiempo article, there's not really, sometimes as contemporary Native artists, we talk about how we're breaking traditions and we're groundbreakers and things like that. And that's not necessarily the case. You know, I was saying the ground that we're breaking is when we go collect the clay, you know, we say our prayers and gather the clay, gather our minerals. That's when we're really breaking ground in that sense. So it's interesting of how they will sometimes define us and things like that. Again, just growing up in a creative environment. My mother is a potter, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, always growing up in a creative environment. My dad was a mechanical engineer at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. You know, he'd be painting on the weekends, painting after work. Parents would be working on pottery, go to school at the at the day, or more so like the kindergarten rather, Head Start kindergarten. And after school, you could get out half a day, go to my grandparents' house, maternal grandparents' house, and my aunts, my godmother, my mother, my aunt, and my aunt, her son's here also, Juan de la Cruz, who's an amazing young potter that's making a name for himself as well too. So we'd be there watching them creating vessels, making pottery, and just being around it all the time. And then as my mom's a potter, we go to different art shows, California, Colorado, Albuquerque. Growing up, Indian market was always there. It's just been a constant. It's just there. It's the second, third weekend of August. It's always there. I don't know anything else. I was 3 weeks old in a basket under my paternal grandmother's roof, and laying with the pots and things like that. So again, there's my origin story laying next to that pot, taking a little bite of the clay, as they're working on it, you take a little bit and eat it. And that's kind of part of that origin too. So like I say, it's like the Hulk, you're just infused with it. You're growing up in Santa Clara, people constantly firing pottery, you smell it, you smell the horse manure, the odors coming into your room, or so you're all like, oh, somebody's firing pottery, get the laundry off the line, close the windows, type of thing. So that's going into you again. So again, that's the whole thing. And just growing up, always creating, always seeing work, going to gallery shows. This is the 1970s. Different artists you see influencing the work. You see them kind of the rock stars of the 70s, native Pueblo artists. Then growing up, 80s, like Tony mentioned, my older brother and his brother, Dino, were very close growing up. And they moved back to the Pueblo around 6th grade-ish, I think is when you moved back. They were originally living in Denver. And I remember my brother and them would always be, they'd always go to each other's house. They'd either be at our house or they'd be over at their house. And so it was just one of those things, we were always together also. And, reading comic books, talking about movies, did you see this? Drawing, seeing who could draw a better cartoon character or whatever. And so there's always that influence there. So, Tony's a brother, he's also my god brother as well too. So, we share a long connection together as well too. So Tony mentioned, as I was growing up, I started creating clay figurines, influenced by paternal uncle, Luther, Layla, Ben, Margaret. They made these little figurines, so being like, oh man, I really dig those. They did polychrome. And there's constant styles throughout Santa Clara. They're always thinking of the polished carved black pottery. That's like the traditional Santa Clara Pueblo. I always use quotations, traditional, contemporary, because it's just, again, a label that doesn't necessarily define us as contemporary, traditional Native American artists, potters, whatever. So just growing up and having all these different influences of pottery, maternal side, polychrome, polished, polychrome pottery. My parents are doing sgraffito, which is the highly polished, burnished, with the designs etched into the surface. Paternal side, doing highly polished pottery. Tina Garcia, Virginia, Greg Garcia, great grandmother Severa Tapoya. So there's that quote unquote traditional Santa Clara Pueblo pottery influence there. So it's just really a matter of like, not necessarily said like, oh, you have to create your work in this manner. It was more of being taught how to respect the clay, how to gather the clay, all the various steps of processing the clay, of firing and just all the different methods of quote unquote traditional Pueblo pottery. So, you know, that was kind of the direction that I started. And you know, it was a way to make money to buy comic books, video games, things like that. So, you know, it was already kind of seen as that of the family business. You know, there's shoemakers, there's tanners, there's leather workers, there's pottery makers, there's artists. That's kind of the direction I just kind of started going into.
I just wanted to, sorry to interrupt, Jason. I'm glad you mentioned Leela and Van as well, because actually I was going to mention that because you can see this continuum in a sense from their work. You know, it's one of the really strong polychrome works. Like you said, that people often think of it just, you know, blackware or redwares, but they have those really strong polychrome works that are also like evident in your work, because you're known for your very contemporary depictions, but also your an immense color palette as well. You know, they're very vibrant, and it just shows that continuum, but also that willingness to go out there and experiment and work with the native slips as well. And that's something that's both, as you said, it's both contemporary and traditional. But you know but just as they did, that for their time, they're in a sense groundbreaking. But it's just, again, it's just part of that continuum that also keeps rolling along.
Right, exactly. And then also being influenced by, you know, the paintings on the wall, you know, Awatire, Ohuap 8, and all the studio artists as well too. And again, that's part of that, of my dad being a painter, of being influenced by what he was painting, and then also seeing, you know, the paintings in books and things like that, or going to museums and you know, I was just thinking about one of the gentlemen here in the audience. He has a podcast. It's called A Creative Excuse. You know, some of those things that he asked his guests are saying, like, what was like one of the turning points, or what was one of these things that influenced you as young artists? And he's invited me as a guest in the future. And I was already been thinking about what are some of those things. And I think, you know, we all have different experiences, but I think about visiting my uncle who lived, and his partner lived in Washington, D.C. So from like the 6th grade to about my first year in college, you know, we would go out there pretty often and going to National Museum of Art, Smithsonian, all these things, and seeing all different artists. Western art, European art was a lot of that influence as well too. So that's also part of that origin story as well too. You know, high school, went to Pewaukee High School as well too. So, you know, a good school, I guess, that, you know, we both went to. And then as after school, trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do? I like architecture, I like line drawing. I was into scale modeling at the time also. So, you know, doing a lot of those things and looking at attention to detail. So started looking at draftsmanship. Went to school at Northern New Mexico Community College, now Northern New Mexico College in Espanola. Was there for a little while, then decided to go to University of New Mexico. Went there, Los Alamos, and then transferred to University of New Mexico, Albuquerque. And you know, everybody is like, oh, you work in clay, you should be a ceramicist. But there was that completely different shift from this type of work and kiln numbers and cones and ferrous oxide and, you know, all this stuff. And, you know, there's just so much chemistry that goes into it. And so I was kind of turned off by that when I took, you know, first like intro to ceramics. So I went in the direction of photography and documenting in that sense, because, you know, on the little clay figurines I was already documenting my observations around me. So I started doing photography, silver color photography. I studied with the late Patrick Nagatani there at UNM, and then graduated in '98, and kind of just figured out, what do I want to do now that I'm graduated? Went to work at Santa Fe Indian School for 2 years with the Gifted and Talented program, and really enjoyed that time period that I was there. Some current emerging established young artists were in high school at that time: Rose Simpson, Jared Chavez, and I won't say that I influenced them. I think it was more of a mutual influence also of knowing them from their own parents and their brothers and sisters as well too. Then I went to work in 2002 for Santa Clara Pueblo, and I worked in the Office of Land Claims Rights Protection, and so started 2002, and during that time was doing a lot of different cultural resources work. We were working with various archaeological groups. Mr. Alan Osborne here is one of them that I met at that time. Began working here with School for Advanced Research, kind of just doing our little mini consultations, Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, Mesa Verde, and so during that time, I was studying a lot of history and my own Tewa history, and going out the actual sites in the Galisteo Basin region and learning about the Southern Tewas, and really thinking about how I really wanted to document some of these stories that I was learning about, and learning some of our Pueblo history, Tewa history, but not really either understanding it, but just kind of mind blown to go out to, like, say, Galisteo, Pueblo, and you see the nave of the church that still remains from the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. So it's just kind of mind blowing to see, those archaeological cultural sites and things like that. And then visiting places like Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, and then being that we were working for the tribes that were culturally affiliated, we were able to go like in the back, behind the scenes essentially, where your normal visitor wouldn't be able to go. So, all these things are just kind of building up. And in 2007, well, I was already aware of School for Advanced Research. The late, I can't think of her name, Linda Cordell, sorry. Knowing her through SAR encouraged me of saying, like, hey, Jason, look into Indian Arts and Research fellowship. So, applied. And then I remember we had a meeting here for the Galisteo Basin thing, and I remember she was like so happy to see me, and then she was like, oh, I wanted to tell you the good news that you got the Dubin Fellowship. So I was like, all right, fantastic. So, went to my boss, talked to my wife at the time, went to my boss, we talked about it. I didn't talk to my boss, I talked with my wife, now ex-wife. And, we talked and said, well, do I make the springboard to, professional artists? What do I do? So, I went back the next day, wrote out my resignation just in case, talked to my boss. He said, no, we can't give you a 3-month leave of absence. So, it's already in the envelope, and it's just a matter of like, here you go. I'll start cleaning out my desk 2 weeks, and made the transition over here to SAR, and was here for 3 months, and it was an amazing experience. And since I already had a lot of this ideas of what I wanted to create, what I wanted to do, the Tewa Tales of Suspense actually kind of was the project that came out of my Dubin Fellowship here. And again, of being a historian buff, I guess, of all different types of history. There's just all these different layers, and then also growing up Catholic, being immersed in all these different art museum world. There's so many different layers of where the work comes from, and its influence and things like that. So, finished the fellowship here, had an amazing time. The staff were amazing. Some of them are here that were there in 2007. Others have left, but it was an amazing creative time period, and it was great because I remember going to Lonnie and asking him, you were like the first Dubin fellow, like what was your experience? he told me, and then there's other Dubin fellows, Gary Yazzie, it was another one, and he's like, oh yeah, this is, think about this and use your time wisely and research the collections and things like that. And there's the new Dubin fellow, Ian Cooley, who's here, and he's taken over the realm, or the reins, I guess you would say, creative reins in June. So, I wish you well from one Dubin fellow, and I'm sure Lonnie would probably say the same as well too. Blessings to you for creativity, and worked as a professional artist and was Mr. Mom at the same time. So just kind of balancing the household duties and then also creating work. And in 2010, I was invited by one of the professors at Arizona State University to do a artist residency on printmaking, because they had seen my work and said, like, oh man, your work, this work is idea for print, like the translation is perfect. But then also not realizing, oh, this is actually influenced by print, comic books. It's influenced by Avengers number 53 or 7, I believe. So it's like Behold the Vision, and you look Behold Popeye. And so it's, there's that direct link between the two. And so went to ASU, spent there a week there in Tempe, and worked with graduate students, and kind of thought about the process, learned about the process of serigraphy, which is silkscreen, where you're building different colors of layers of color, pulling the ink through the screen and mixing the ink and things like that. And I had taken a printmaking class at UNM, an intro to printmaking class, but it wasn't, it was very introductory, but I didn't get like the love for it. And so after ASU, I started thinking about it. I could do grad school. This is, potentially something, that I could look into. And so kind of looked around, looked at some of the programs. The same professor at ASU had mentioned Chancellor's Fellowship at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So, applied to that one, then also applied to UNM, U of A, and ASU as well too. And later on, a month or two later, got the notice that, yes, you've been accepted to the school. You've been awarded the fellowship. It's a 3-year program. We'll take care of the first 2 years, and then we'll figure it out after that, type of thing. And it was kind of, what Lonnie was saying, sometimes certain things are meant to be. It's kind of serendipitous, because, in the early 80s, my dad was going out to Madison, and he would go out for different trainings and workshops and things like that the lab put on. And so, he'd go to the bookstore, come back, buy a shirt, so I had a red shirt that said, had Bucky on it, Wisconsin. So, I was wearing it like 8, 9, 10 years old. And so it was just one of those things that it was always, it was kind of in the back of my mind in that sense. And then, but then also the things that sometimes that I also mention in a couple of the presentations is, I'm a pretty big Badger fan, football fan, and things like that. I went to like 4 games last year. So, so being like a huge fan also has certain, again, those layers of the work. Yeah, the badger is the sacred animal in the Tewa cosmology. It represents the south, and then also the color red is also a representation, is the South Mountain. My traditional Tewa name is Okuping, which is Turtle Mountain, the Sandia Mountains. And so there's kind of all these little layers of how things kind of just happen, I guess, in that sense. So, and if you check my Instagram, I got tons of selfies of Bucky Badger, so I know him pretty well in that sense. So it spent 3 years in Madison doing intaglio etching, and really enjoyed and loved the process of printmaking. And intaglio got into it pretty hardcore, I would say. I think it was the way that clay is of the patience and the time, and you're processing the clay. It has to be a correct ratio. If it isn't, then it'll crack, it'll buckle, it'll warp. You're putting it into the etch bath. It depends on how your etch goes. Inking the plate, wiping off the plate, putting it to the press, and then rolling it through. You pull it out, and it's just like clay of where you spend hours and days and months and years of not necessarily trying to perfect it, but because it's a combination of, like Lonnie said, the combination between the maker in that sense, our maker, and then also clay mother, and then also just the spirits that are around us. And I always say like printmaking lots, but then also print. There's the clay deities and things that surround us, and the wind affects it, water, if it's raining, if it's thundering, if it's snowing, all those different factors that come in to play too. And printmaking is a little bit different because we don't have to really worry about those environmental things in that sense, I guess, or those variables in that sense. You kind of eliminate a lot of the variables. But then there's little things like, you're sharing a shared studio with undergrads who are like 18, 19 years old, who they don't know how to clean up after themselves. So they leave ink all over the place, and you get ink on your clothes, you get it transferred to the paper and things like that, where they don't wash certain materials, or they change the pressure on the beds, and you might have something set up perfectly. So again, it's just eliminating all these different variables. Or I always say the muse is present. If the music's on and the vibe is good, that spirit is there helping you to create and work and create prints and things like that. So in the end, I took a year off from school, and then I went and then took a break from school, came back, knew that I wanted to do this large print suite of Tewa Tells the Suspense. It's about 11 to 14 colors on each, an edition of 20. I kind of knew I had like a small window of time, about 4 months really, from January to May basically. And it was just constant every day, pulling the screen, mixing ink. I have a whole presentation, like Tony said, about the difference between hand-pulled original prints versus digital reproductions. I'm sure everybody that knows me has heard the story already, and they know printmaking is an art, that it's not taking pictures and getting it printed to the computer. Created that, and again, like Lonnie said, these stories aren't mine. That's sometimes how people say like, oh, you created this. And I was like, no, there's more to it. There's different layers. This is cultural stories. This is our Tewa history. Just like the Avanyu up there. That doesn't belong to us. It's a cultural property. It's belongs to everybody. It's representation of nature and things like that. Just like the skateboard with the Avanyu is on here as well too. That I painted as well. I unfortunately didn't bring any clay work with me today. So there's these stories that are part of what makes us in that sense. So I'm sharing those stories, and then also teaching them to my own kids, the audience here, Tewa kids. I work with the Kapo Community School as well too. I was blessed with a Native Art and Culture Foundation Fellowship, where I'm mentoring a young man from Santa Clara. So it's just these sharing of ideas, just like my parents shared with me, or my uncle has shared with me of his processes, and other artists that we collaborate with. There's like 2 artists that I know in the room that I've collaborated with as well too. And so there's that give and take and things like that. So like Lonnie said, of him winning the best of show, best of classification, it's an award that's bestowed upon you, but it also belongs to multiple people as well too. And I won Best of Classification twice, which I tease of saying, yeah, that's second place loser, because first place winner is Best of Show. But also, like Lonnie said, the thing with micaceous pots is there's the collector out there that says, oh, it's not beautiful. It's not a traditional Tewa polished pot. Just like this, oh, that's not a traditional Santa Clara pot. That's a tile. What is that? That's not traditional. Well, what is this? That's based on Kiva murals, based on stories, based on this story, this hide painting in the back. You can't get any traditional than that. Where we're telling our stories, we're telling our lives and things like that. So that's kind of the way I see it. And with the printmaking, I won Best of Class for the work that I did at ASU, and I won a Best of Class for the work that I did at University of Wisconsin. But I think it's being that it's a print, it's an edition of, say, 25, 20. They're multiples, but they're all original. There's the ink that's created. Each color is mixed. There's 5 colors basically: black, white, red, blue, yellow. And you're mixing. You gotta pull out your color wheel and mix it. And then pulling each individual color, and then making sure that all those 20 match one another. So I think that's kind of where they say, oh, well, it's 20. It's not 1. So there's just kind of that thought of misunderstanding of how print can be like Best of Show, because Best of Show is like one of a kind of saying like, there's only one of these pots. Well, there's only one of these edition. It's a similar, but it's not similar in that sense. So I think that's kind of those weird things that,
it's not the bias of like reproduction.
Right, exactly. And so that's kind of that rocking the boat kind of thing, being like, oh, how does this make sense?
Exactly. And then I think another thing is, especially in your work, is that people can see it, again, as you said, it's different levels. Like when looking at it, like this piece here, the Tewa Tales of Suspense, that one person sees it as a piece of Pueblo history, and Tewa history. Then another person would see it, again, as you mentioned, who has had no familiarity with the history of the Southwest, but they might recognize it. Oh, that's based off that John Buscema Avengers cover, things like that. But it's part of that continuum, and also being a conduit. That basically you mentioned, like we're in a sense that we are like kind of conduits for this, for the past and for the future of things coming forward into the past. I want to ask a very quick question of both of you. And it's probably something that I'm the only person who's interested in this as well. But do you ever dream of making things?
Maybe unconsciously, but never that I remember of dreaming about it. But it seems like there's oftentimes I'm in a dream as I'm working. There's oftentimes, if not most of the time, that I feel like I'm in a dream when I'm making. But like the piece of the SAR, many people have asked me, how did you make it? What was the technology? What were you thinking? How did you make this happen? And I honestly cannot say how I did it, because I was in that dream state, I guess. I was in another experience, and that generally happens when you go into the work, because we all have that capacity. And so, yes, I think maybe it's not a conscious thing that happens, but as you go into it, you are living that dream as you're creating it.
Yeah, I think in terms of dreaming, like sleep dreaming, laying asleep at night and dreaming, if I'm creating anything, it's probably thinking about the house, my paternal grandparents' house that I'm renovating. I'm thinking like what it should look like. So that's one creation, which is a creation. Then two, like Lonnie said, is that just that dream state as you're working of you know, I always say, you know, I always say the muse, you know, but the muse can be clay mother, it can be anything. But, you know, once you guys are tight, you know, there ain't nothing taking that feeling away. I mean, you could be polishing a pot, making it shiny, you could be mixing the clay, and you're just vibing, you're in that zone, and nothing will take it away. I mean, you're just making magic, but it's not you, it's coming, you're the receiver in that sense. So, you know, and it comes in different ways too, you know, even sanding a pot or digging clay or driving back from getting clay.
I was just asking, because once I dreamed that I knew how to draw the perfect eye, and I actually was doing it in the dream, and I said, I can do this, and I actually knew I was dreaming. I said, no, I know how to do this. And then of course, I didn't start trying to do it after I woke up like a day later, and I realized I completely forgot how to do it, and I've never been able to capture that again. So another one is, I know Lonnie mentioned in the past too that you don't like to have anyone watch you sometimes when you work, and particularly when you're firing, that you just kind of like, you know, it's kind of like a private process. I think probably like when your brother was like, what would be around, right?
Yes.
And then, you know, even like when sometimes even like you said, besides working like in either the class environment or other times too, but it can be a very like almost like a solitary type of work that you both do. Do you like having people around, or is there something else that you bring with you? Is there music that you listen to, or do you like it quiet?
Well, I definitely prefer working by myself, and if I'm like mixing clay, I definitely have to be totally focused, and I can't have anyone around to distract me. Firing is another thing too, and my brother would come when we're firing the large ones, because it's a big job to do it by yourself. And I've had to ask people to leave when they came over because they saw me firing. Oh, can come and watch? I said, no, I'm sorry, you have to leave, and right now. Because it's so tense that you, for me, I'm not able to have anybody else around, and I enjoy working by myself. And I often work with just nothing on. I'll just hear the birds, or I just hear the wind, or I just hear the sound of the clay that I'm working. Other times I listen to the radio, but and then sometimes I'll just be working, and suddenly I say, oh my God, I have a headache because I haven't even stopped to eat. You know, you just get that focused into it. So ideally, I like working by myself.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say I'm kind of a mix. I would say I friends tease me of saying like, oh, percentage, I think of percentages at times. So I'd say like 80% of the time solitary, 20% with other company around. If it's printing, it's nice to have dry hands where, you know, you're pulling a print and then someone's picking it up, putting it away, you know, that's nice. Pottery, I would say for the most part, I'm pretty solitary, and it is kind of nice, you know. Firing pottery, my dad will come out and check, what do you do? How's it coming along, you know? Sometimes I'm like, go away, you know. Other times I'm like, yeah, well, you know, it's coming along pretty good. I know some families they gotta have 10 people all in the household, all painting, but there might be assembly line also too. Which isn't a bad thing either. That's part of the traditional Pueblo pottery practices as well too. Collaboration. Listening to things, 90s R&B, rockabilly, and Roy Orbison. And lately I've been having Netflix going on, Cheers and MASH, and what was another show? Those are like good shows just to play in the background because they're more auditory humor. You don't have to watch, you know. You hear Hawkeye, and you're like, oh yeah, I know what Hawkeye's doing, you know. Or Sam Malone is talking to, you know, Diane, and you know what they're about, so it's pretty easy. You don't have to watch it.
So. We were going to work with this the Seminole tribe in Florida, and there was this guy who was a registrar there at the time, and he had, you know, a do and a Western plaid shirt, you know, the jeans and the boots. and he knew Jason, and I forget, is his name Jason? He was the registrar at the Akchin, the Seminole Museum.
Oh, yeah, Jason. Yeah, Jason, I forgot what his name is, his last name.
Yeah. But he said, he knew Jason. He saw me, he said, you know, Jason Garcia? And I said, because he knew that Jason's piece was in the show. I said, yeah, I know him. And he's, is he still wearing it high and tight? I thought, and I was like, yes, he is. And then, I guess, but it's funny because it was the first time that I really realized that, oh, Jason has like his own style. I mean, and it'd been around for like years, but I just kind of like, for me, that was Jason. It was like, oh, it's always Jason. And I realized, oh wait, no, it's his style. Or it's, and it's kind of the same thing, and you know, both like that. One, you know, your works, you know, are very painterly, and with Lonnie, you have that an added element at the very end. With the firing, with that other almost painterly element with the fire clouds. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. In fact, I feel like if the work doesn't have any fire clouding on it, somehow it's incomplete. And yet there are some times when there's one small piece tucked in under the others that the fire clouding just doesn't happen. But I love watching them, and my mom is really good at it. She'll look at them and she can see a variety of different things. And like I said, that one stylized serpent design that came on that one large water jar, and I have no control over it, but I love the variation of the color. It almost still feels like you see the flame burning around them. And so if it doesn't have a design, it feels like it's not complete, unless if it's a reduction firing, then of course it won't have the fire clouding.
We're almost done here, but are there any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I'm going to ask another name question. So, yes, Alan.
Jason, you shared with us that when you were in Madison, you would go running, and then you ran through areas that were sacred sites to Native people there, and I thought that was very touching and profound.
Yeah, that was one of the things in one of the presentations I gave to Southwest Seminars. We were talking about the way land affects the work and things like that. And while living in Madison is ancestral Ho-Chunk land, and there's several mounds throughout the city of Madison and in various places on the campus. So, you know, like Alan mentioned, just kind of recognizing that I was a guest in their community, and one of my mentors is Ho-Chunk as well. His name is Tom Jones. So, you know, it's really nice to be in their community and welcomed there as well too. So.
Just really quickly too, that the both of you, and actually I guess I'll throw myself in there too, did something that sometimes, you know, is not very easy, and it certainly really wasn't easy when you did it, was, you know, again, to leave, you know, and stay away for a time. Like you said, when you went to school, I remember too that when I left to go to school in Denver, it didn't hit me that I was actually leaving till I was in the car and we were pulling out. And then I remember like putting my head against the glass and realizing that I was leaving. I was actually leaving, and I was gonna be by myself. And when my mom said that later on, she said, well, for the kids, you know, I have to hand it to him. He was able to be strong enough to stay away. Because there was times when I just wanted to come back and just couldn't handle it. But and I think, you know, like Jason kind of like did it the right way as well. Like he stayed, you know, again, it wasn't like right after like high school or whatever too, but you know, he was able to like figure things out first and then able to go, and he had his plan, you know, set. And then so that he was, I think, very wise, very wise.
Thank you, but that's not. we like to think that we have a plan, but that's not quite exactly how it went. So.
Any other questions?
Jason, now that you're doing the skateboard decks, you ever thought about doing old school clay wheels for skateboards?
That might be a possibility. So the skateboard that I have is for an upcoming show at Diné College. It's Pivot, and it's a group of native artists that have been invited to paint skateboard decks. So, you know, I have the avenue on the deck, but it's also influenced by Steve Caballero skate deck from the 84-ish, when I was into all of that skate culture and things like that. So I think it was interesting what you just said about moving away and things like that. And it's not easy of moving away, because one of my classmates is Navajo. Her name's Dakota Mace. She's a photographer and currently a design student now. And you know, there are days when it was like minus 38, not factoring in the wind chill, and man, it was like, oh man, what the hell are we doing in Madison, effing Wisconsin? It was horrible, you know. So, you know, there's also those factors as well too. And then, like you said, you know, you have those points where you're like, what am I doing here, Madison? Why? But then there's other days where you're like, oh man, this is amazing, you know, of meeting, you know, Frank Stella and going to one of his talks and seeing like this exhibition of all his print work. Oh man, it was so freaking amazing to have that, or to have your mentor Linda Berry, who's also a premier comic book artist, is on your committee, and just having, you know, that influence, mentorship, all those things, and you're like, oh man, this is why I'm here in grad school. You know, I mean, there's those experiences that you know, outweigh everything, you know, so. And then there's the good and the bad, you know, we all take it, so.
I guess also the time period that I was raised in, because of transportation and just physical distances, it was a big thing. Two of my mother's sisters, one older and one younger, were married to men from outside the village. And so one was in the military, but they always came home for the feast day. And although it was non-Indian, he came and he was very dedicated to it. And my other aunt too, she would always come home for the feast day. And I remember as they left the village, they left our house, because they generally would stay at my mother's house. And it would be so sad, it felt like they were almost gonna just drop off the end of the earth, like, when are we gonna see you again? Like, there was just no concept of anyone leaving. It was just a very unusual thing.
And was that, was it the bus stop at the Y in Espanola, at that old motel?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so, even when I moved to Washington, D.C., I left, I think the day after or the following day after our feast day. And so as we were leaving, those balloons were going up in Albuquerque. And I was questioning myself, and I made the right decision.
Anyway, I think we're almost out of time, so maybe we should wrap it up there.
Or one more question?
Or is there
I know there are people in the audience that said, I'm gonna ask you a question.
Oh, is there? Yeah, no, we have time for a question. Someone throw one out there.
Bruce, you gotta have a question.
Did you make up the red and badger thing?
I'm sorry?
Did you make up the red and badger thing?
Did I make up the what? Sorry?
The red and the badger thing.
Oh, no, our colors are cardinal red and white, so on Wisconsin, go Badgers. I'm not wearing any Badger gear tonight, but my badging's on the car, so.
We had worked with a designer, you know, when she grew up back east. Actually, she grew up in Boston, and she came out here to work as an exhibit designer. And she was just talking one day, and we were talking about the areas in the mountains and the sandias, and she asked me, what does that mean anyway? And then I was telling her, and she says, really? Just because to me it looks like a big turtle. And I was like, well, yeah, obviously. She's like, well, someone has the right eyes.
Santa, no question? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Lonnie. I'm just curious, which schools did you guys attend when you were in Denver? Having grown up there, I'd just like to know what those associations are.
It was a school called the Barnes School of Commerce, and it was run by a family. They all were instructors, and I look back on it now and I said, my God, it felt like I went to a school in the 1700s, you know? It was just that they had that way of thinking, and of course this was the late 60s. But it was near a May D&F company. It was like a huge department store.
Going downtown?
Yeah.
By the skating rink?
I don't remember skating rink.
Okay, it might have been later. Yeah.
But it wasn't far from the Capitol building.
Yeah. I went to the Colorado Institute of Art, which I wouldn't recommend for anyone unless you want to get into extensive debt. And also to the University of Colorado, Denver, which also gets you into extensive debt, but of a different type.
Where's your elementary school?
Ellsworth Elementary, right near First and Garfield. And I was actually remembering this, that we're talking about this because of that Netflix thing that came on. There was a period when we were there when they were making us stay inside or keeping us really close during recess. Because they were basically just implicit that a gorilla had escaped from the zoo. But actually what it was with the second time Ted Bundy escaped. Actually, that's what it was. We weren't, but everyone knew he was coming to Denver. Everyone knew. No, he's not going the other way. He's coming to Denver. Bundy's coming to Denver. Yeah. But anyway, any other questions for these two fine gentlemen? If not, I just want to extend my thanks for their continued work, for their participation this evening, and for giving us the opportunity to get to know both of you a little better. And we hope that all of you will kind of take this with you and continue to support them in their works. And I really appreciate it. And again, thanks to SAR and everyone here for making this evening happen.
Thanks to everyone for coming. Both Lonnie and Jason have work up at the front if you'd like to experience some of their work firsthand.